Thank you very much. Well, welcome to this virtual meeting of Kensington and Chelsea's Planning Committee. This evening's meeting is held in accordance with government regulations allowing councils to hold virtual meetings. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the Planning Committee, and I'm joined this evening by four of my fellow councillors. Perhaps we can all introduce ourselves, starting with maybe Councillor Bakhtiar. Would you like to just come up online and say hello?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. This is Councillor Mohammed Bakhtiar, a member of the Planning Committee.
Great. Thanks, Mo. And then Councillor Bennett.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Councillor Tom Bennett here, Councillor for Redcliffe Ward.
Thanks, Tom. And then Councillor Wala Idris.
Good evening, everyone. It's Councillor Wala Idris. I'm part of the committee. Thank you.
Great. And finally, Councillor Charles O'Connor. Charles.
Good evening, Councillor Charles O'Connor, Holland Ward, Vice Chairman of the committee.
Great. Thank you very much. So it will be the five of us who are all. Hello.
Hello.
So the five of us as elected councillors we will be making the decision on the matter before us this evening. We're also joined by a number of officers who will make presentations and advise us. The presenting officer this evening is going to be Derek Taylor. Derek, perhaps you could introduce yourself just briefly.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everybody. My name is Derek Taylor, and I'm the Deputy Head of Development Management for the borough.
Thank you. The officer team this evening is led by Amanda Reid, the Director of Planning and Place. Amanda, would you like to just say hello to everyone?
Good evening, members of the committee, colleagues and members of the public. My name is Amanda Reid and I'm the Director of Planning and Place for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea.
Thank you. If any other officers need to speak during the evening, then I'll introduce them. If I could just ask everybody to please stay on mute with their video off, unless you are about to invited to speak. That will help the quality of the line. I would just like to stress before we start that all members of the committee will have received the reports and representations that have been tabled, and also the addendum report, which has also been circulated. So if I can perhaps move to start the meeting. Apologies for absence. I think there are none. Everyone who it was intended would sit this evening is indeed here. Can I ask, are there any declarations of interest from colleagues? And I will take silence as there being none. Thank you. Are there any other declarations? I think I should just mention briefly that having sat on this committee for a few years, I was actually present when the committee made its original decision in September 2018. I think that's something we should just note. So we can now move on to this evening's business. Now, this evening is a rather unusual kind of meeting, because what we are doing is that we are actually deciding what kind of representation we make back to the Mayor of London as the decision maker. So although this application obviously has, most of us are familiar with it and it's been going on for a number of years, strictly this evening we are deciding on the representation that we make to the Mayor of London when he or his representative determines the application on I think its provisional date is the 22nd of October. So it's it's an unusual situation. We are not actually considering the application in the normal way
this evening. It's something slightly different. And I think in the presentation, Derek Taylor is going to make this very clear. So I think Derek, whenever you're ready, please go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Angela Del Borga is now joining.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few slides to take you through, just to give you a little bit of the background, and also to sort of bring the development to life with some images, before and after montages. I think just to begin with, I thought I'd show a slide to just confirm or summarise the main points of the planning history. As you'll probably have gleaned from the report, or indeed your own memories, this planning authority resolved in September 2018 that planning permission should be refused. In November 18, the Mayor issued a direction under the Mayor of London order saying that he would actually take over the application and act as the local planning authority. The council filed a claim for judicial review seeking to quash the Mayor's direction, and the Mayor ultimately in March 2019 filed a consent order basically agreeing that the original direction should be quashed, and that was approved by the High Court in April 2019. The Mayor then held a public representation hearing on the 21st of June 2019. You will have seen appended to the report in the pack, you will have seen the council's original representation letter raising objections to the proposals as presented to the Mayor in June 2019. So the whole representation letter from the planning authority is appended to the report, and I assume you'll have read that and understood its content. The council then filed another claim for judicial review, and that was again approved by the High Court, this time in March 2020. And that brings us up to the present date, where the Mayor now needs to redetermine the application. The Mayor is consulting on the application again now, given the passage of time and also some changes to the development plan and the submission of updated documents by the applicants to deal with the time and those changes. As the Chairman has already said, a public hearing is now scheduled to take place on the 22nd of October, and the Council has until the 1st of October to make representations. Just to remind you that there is no power of decision before this planning authority now. The planning authority is essentially now the Mayor, and that this authority only now has the power to make representations. So following this evening's meeting, a similar letter to the letter last prepared for June 2019 will be prepared over the next few weeks, and that will then be submitted to the Mayor, obviously in good time before the 1st of October. The task this evening is to reaffirm the position of the Council as a key consultee, and just to remind the Mayor of the up-to-date objections that this council has to the proposals. That's obviously additional to all the other representations that objectors and everyone who's taken an interest so far will be separately sending to the Mayor. So just to run through the reasons for objection to the Mayor, the first bullet point on the slide that I'm showing here is the substantive objection, which is that the height and the massing of the proposed development, including an additional tower, would cause a less than substantial harm to the character and the appearance of nearby heritage assets, especially in nearby views. The elevational treatments would be of an insufficiently high design quality to have a wholly positive impact on the character and quality of the townscape, and the relevant tests for tall buildings and the building height SPD have not been undertaken. the benefits of the development would not outweigh these harms, and then that the relevant policies are set out in that recommended reason for refusal. The second bullet is that the revisions secured by the GLA subsequent to their taking over the application worsen the impacts of the proposal and weaken the design rationale for the original development. And the third one is that the public benefits are insufficient to outweigh the harm to the character and appearance of nearby heritage assets and the character and the quality of the townscape. The last two bullets just confirm that the changes that have taken place in the meantime are really not very important in terms of the council's fundamental reason for refusal as recommended. They don't alter the council's position, and the development fails to comply with the development plan now, just as it did a year ago or indeed 2 years ago. The last one just confirms that there are no material considerations that indicate a decision should be made otherwise than in accordance with the development plan. So I think members will be familiar with the terminology in the last bullet, which derives from the statutory requirements set in section 38. So just to remind you, that's the footprint of the existing building. Latterly the Holiday Inn, and of course, but prior to that, the Forum Hotel. You can see there Cromwell Road running along to the north of the site at the top of the slide, and then Ashburn Gardens on the western side, Ashburn Place on the eastern side, and then Courtfield Road running across the bottom of the slide. And that's just an aerial view which shows at its centre the Holiday Inn, as it's identified there with a little pink bubble. You can see there the Gloucester Road underground station development, and the Cromwell Road is very evident running from east to west across the centre of the slide. But what is immediately obvious from that aerial photograph is the relative height of the existing Holiday Inn building in comparison to the prevailing height in the townscape around it. You can see a number of garden squares immediately evident. Most of the surroundings there are contained within conservation areas, and there are also obviously a number of listed buildings. And the existing hotel, as you can see, is the single largest prominent building in its vicinity. This block plan just breaks down the proposals that are part of this application. You see there that the proposed new building to replace the existing hotel building is effectively divided into three main segments. The taller segment on the left-hand side would be the hotel tower. The smaller tower, identified there in blue, would be the serviced apartment tower. And then the residential units, which are described in the report, are seen there in the green, which is the lower block fronting Courtfield Road. And that's an image taken from the corner of Courtfield Road looking north up Ashburn Place, so that the Cromwell Road is up there to the left, and then Gloucester Road is along Courtfield Road to the right-hand side of the image. You can see there the three main elements to the building quite clearly. And then that's an image taken sort of quite from the Cromwell Road on the north side, with the existing Forum Hotel, Holiday Inn Hotel, very evident behind the Cromwell Road Victorian buildings. And the proposal would result in that. So that's the existing view, and that's the proposed view. I've got a few more slides now just to show you the before and afters. And so that's the view now looking west along Cromwell Road. Gloucester Road is roughly at the centre of the slide. And then that view, if this was to be permitted and built, would become that. So that's the existing, and that's the proposed. And then a further view, just taken from immediately outside the Gloucester Road Arcade, with the Holiday Inn there on the left of the image, and then the Holiday Inn, well, not the Holiday Inn, but the proposed new building, now very evident in the centre of the slide. And then this one is taken looking down Grenville Place, so it's looking southbound towards the Cromwell Road, with the Holiday Inn looming behind, and that would become that. That's the existing, that's the proposed. And then this is taken looking south down Launceston Place, obviously central to the conservation area, one of the key views looking south. I don't actually have a montage for this image, but what I do have is an outline for the proposed building. And I think from the previous slides, you won't have too much trouble filling in the outline there. And then finally, a longer view taken along Cromwell Road. That's the existing, and that's the proposed. Sorry, I said finally. I just have one more, which is looking along Ashburn Place, existing and proposed. So that's the existing, and that's the proposed. So the recommendation to the committee this evening is that the council should maintain its previous objections to the scheme in relation to the height, the massing, the design and associated impact on the character and appearance of heritage assets, as set out in paragraph 2.1 of the report, and that the Mayor should revisit the verified views and assessments of townscape impact. The second recommendation is that the council should maintain its objections in relation to conflict with policies and guidance relating to tall buildings, whilst emphasising the changes in policy in the intended to publish London plan that support the objections and why the proposal fails to meet the relevant policies relating to tall buildings. The third recommendation is that the council should include additional representations in relation to the submitted fire statement and ask the Mayor to satisfy himself that the points raised by the council's principal fire engineer have been suitably addressed prior to making a decision, and that the proposed development achieves the highest standards of fire safety. That one is there to address a new policy contained within the intended to publish London plan. And then the final recommendation is that it should set out the additional information in relation to the number of homes approved or supported by the Planning Committee since June 2019, with 815 units approved since then, including 292 units of affordable housing, with 71 to be built by the council and with more in the pipeline. And that last one, as you'll have seen from the report, which sets out a table, is actually a really key point, because the Mayor so far has been trying to put a lot of emphasis on the housing offer of the developments, and yet, as can be seen from those figures and the figures set out in the report, the position in terms of housing, whilst obviously all new units are needed, is not exactly as the Mayor was attempting to describe it, or the GLA were attempting to describe it. And it's very important to take into account the units that are now in the pipeline. And then some further points. These really flow from the addendum reports that you have before you. The first one there is that the council should be recommending that the Mayor should accord the appropriate weight to development plan policies relating to new hotel developments. And essentially that flows from the need to avoid further intensification in terms of hotel developments, and also that the GLA's forecast need for additional hotel bedrooms for Kensington and Chelsea up to 2040 was only 150 extra bedrooms, And in fact, in the last year, planning permission has been granted for 175 bedrooms at Notting Hill Gate, which already exceeds the forecast. So the whole point of that is that there really is very limited benefit in a new hotel of this scale in this location. That the second bullet there is to remind the Mayor that the employment generated has been overemphasised, that the GLA took the highest point in the range of employment prediction or employment estimate, which was probably unrealistic at the time, being the highest point in the range. And it's quite evident that in the present and probably near future, it'll be remaining unrealistic. It's very difficult to say when the tourist trade in London will pick up to anything like where it was a couple of years ago. So again, in terms of employment generation, very limited weight can be put on that as a benefit to flow from the development. And the third point, again picking up on the addendum reports, is to recommend that the Mayor properly considers the amount and quality of children's play space, which really falls far short of the requirements in the Mayor's own SPD. There is one single high-level play space provided in the development, and that really is not the type of play space that our own SPD, or indeed our own policy rather, or the Mayor's SPD would have been envisaging. So that's a final point to raise to the Mayor. And that was the last slide, Chairman.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the recommendation in front of us this evening is obviously to continue supporting an objection. On that basis, the applicant or the applicant's agent would be entitled to speak first, but they've decided not to register and not to speak. So in that case, we move to people who are in effect supporting the recommendation. And what I'm going to do is one of the local councillors, Councillor Hammond of Caulfield Ward, he's registered. I'm going to invite Greg Hammond to speak first for up to 2 minutes. And then a number of other objectors have registered to speak. And between them, I'm going to allow up to 4 minutes. And then after that, I think members of the committee, colleagues, we're going to have questions. So if I can ask Councillor Hammond, perhaps if you're online, Greg, if you can, when you're ready, if you go ahead, and you've got up to 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. I don't think any of us, whether the ward councillors, the residents or colleagues who were on the planning committee at the time will actually forget the meeting 2 years ago when the committee voted to refuse planning permission to what one of our colleagues rather poetically called the Twin Towers of Mordor. That decision to refuse was the right one, but we were all dismayed when the Mayor of London overrode our local democracy and tried to ram the proposal through at his second attempt. Thanks to the council for twice taking the Mayor's decision to judicial review as described and winning both times. But unfortunately, we do now face this third attack by the Mayor. So the paper presented by the officers to this meeting is, in my view, the right strategy for the mayoral hearing on the 22nd of October. The reason for refusal in the first place was the harms that would be caused by the excessive height and mass of the proposed buildings to the adjacent conservation areas that we all value so much. These harms will be made worse by the amendments that have been made to the proposal since 2018 in increasing the Caulfield Road end of the development by 2 stories. In addition, as the officers mentioned, RBKC now has a good story to tell on affordable housing, in fact, much better than at the time of the last mayoral hearing. And as we've heard, if an increase in hotel rooms becomes an argument, then not only the one in Notting Hill mentioned, but also the Harrington Hall Hotel is about to come back online with 201 bedrooms after many years of vacancy. So in sum, the officers' paper that we've heard Mr. Taylor sets out the arguments that we should present as a borough on the 22nd of October in much more detail than I can do in two minutes. I fully support that paper and I recommend it to you for adoption by the committee this evening. And I'm also asked to say that the Ashburn and Courtfield Gardens Residents Association also supports that paper. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hammond. So now I think we're going to hear from, in turn, I think Michael Bach, and then I think, Michael, you're going to be followed by Laura Golan, and then Mr. Christensen, and then Mr. Crawford. I hope I've got that right. Obviously, it's up to you exactly which order you wish to speak. But Michael Bach, perhaps you would like to start when you're ready. And between all of you, you've got up to 4 minutes. So Michael,
Chair,
please go ahead
Chair,
when you're ready.
Sorry, Chair. This is Tom from Governance. Just to say that we've also got Mr. Barrett on the line, and we've got Angela as well, who's joined us over the phone. So
okay, all right. Well, if there's a bit of time left, then they're very welcome to speak, and of course they are. Maybe the colleagues will be happy to answer, ask them questions as we go along. So thank you for that. So Mr. Bach, when you're ready, perhaps you could start.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I should say we're not an objector. We strongly support the report, but have made some positive suggestions for enhancing that report. You've mentioned some of the things already, so I don't need to dwell on it. The question of the affordable housing delivery was crucial, at least as far as the Mayor was concerned, and he certainly lambasted the council because its immediate past record was very small. But I think the report should go further than it has done and recognise that the council has actually got a programme of affordable housing units in addition to the ones that have granted planning permission already. With regard to the scale location of the new hotel accommodation, this is a very intensely developed area as far as hotels are concerned, and the London plan as intended to be published recognises that in areas of high concentrations, further intensification is not necessarily a good idea. You've dealt with the employment, it's an overestimate. What you haven't mentioned is that our grouping of residents associations has undertaken a townscape study which has really criticised the attempts by the applicant to really say it doesn't have much impact. You've seen the diagram, so you'll understand. We are concerned about the treatment of children's play space on the 10th floor, in other words, the roof of the housing. What we want really is for the comments in the addendum report to be fully reflected in the decision on the letter, because it's not just the comments that are in the addendum report, but need to be fully substantiated. So we're hoping that that will happen, and we're looking forward to seeing it. The council's case must be strong, challenging, and we must look forward to ahead to a potential public inquiry. Thank you. Hello?
Is it my turn now? Can I?
Yeah.
Hi. So I'm Laura Progalon, and I just wanted to add 5 more points to or suggestion to your report. The first one is a consideration regarding the traffic management of this project. Given the number of bed and service apartment at the moment, when we're looking at what is planned for that, the number of parking bays, I think it allows for about 6 cars and 3 buses. That's what I could count. And I don't think it's sufficient for events that can host 1,500 people, which would result in cars idling in the street and disrupted traffic with really wide impact on the community. The second point is related to the air quality in this area. It's one of the most polluted in London, and which actually exceed the legal limits in terms of air pollution. And I'm just surprised that any increase in traffic and in pollution can be considered as negligible, which is what the applicant have are stating. The third point is that any health impact have been omitted from the assessment. So physical health and mental health are not accounted for, which means that the cost on health is assumed to be zero. The fourth point is related to the net zero guidance from the mayor for any new builds, and I believe this project is not net zero. And finally, the last point is related to the health and economic crisis that we are facing, and we know that the forecast in terms of the number of beds and have been revised and significantly reduced. So a lot of people believe that these changes are permanent. People have changed the way they work from home and the way they travel, and this impact are likely to last for decades. So that's.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there. I'm afraid, unfortunately, time is up. But Mr. Christensen and then Mr. Crawford, if you'd just like to add a sentence or two, then I think that would be reasonable. Just very, very briefly, if there's something you would like to add.
I do. I'll be very brief. And I actually live on Courtfield. I'm just down on Courtfield News, and I'll read my question and statement. How much, if any, consideration has been given to the effect a 1,500 person conference center will have on the neighborhood? This is a looming disastrous problem that will include crime, crowd, prostitution, rubbish, traffic, disorderly conduct, damage to the conservation, and a general strain on the neighborhood. And I suspect it has not been addressed at all. I work in the meetings and events industry, and I can assure the impact will be a disaster.
Okay, thank you for that point. It may well be taken up by some of my colleagues. Mr. Crawford, just similarly, in a very briefly, is there some point that you would like to make that hasn't been raised already?
Yes, thank you very much. My question is simple. Has the impact of the restricted capacity of the South Kensington Tube Station due to its planned refurbishment been considered to the Gloucester Road Tube Station during the proposed Kensington Forum Hotel redevelopment? And I would just ask you to answer that when you go through, or reflect upon that as you go through questions and answers now. Thank you.
Yeah. Good. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry that Angela and also Mr. Barrett, you didn't have a chance to speak. Sorry, time was up. But we now have an opportunity for members of the council members of the committee to ask questions. Colleagues, I think Mo, you'd like to go first. If I could just remind everyone, please do state who you'd like to ask a question of, because obviously we've got quite a lot of people present. So Mo, you go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask Michael Bach a direct question. What would you like to add to the letter, to the report, or the representation? If you could be specific, please. What would you like to add? What else? What have we missed?
Well, all the things that were in our representation on this, we'd like to see explained rather than just, I think that the addendum report contains a comment on what we have put forward. But now, I suppose we're looking to the council to take ownership of the issue and to express it strongly in the letter that they sent to the GLA. So it's got to look like it's coming from the council rather than the residents, and it's got to be forceful because this really counts. Have I answered your question?
I think you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else like to ask a question? No? Nobody at all? Well, I suspect that may be because there's quite a lot of agreement with the points that everyone has made, and also the points that have been made in the representations in the addendum report that obviously we've all read as well. Well, in that case, I think we can move on. So thank you, everyone who spoke, registered to speak. We now move on in the discussion to an opportunity for members of the committee to ask Derek Taylor or Amanda Reed or Ross Fletcher, who's a member of the legal department, if we've got any questions of officers. Wale, you've just put your hand up, so to speak. Wale, you go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My question is actually to the officers, to maybe Mr. Taylor. Two points, actually. The first one is, what is the mayor's criteria on playgrounds for children? Does he have any specific criteria where they should be, how high they should be, how big, or is it just having playgrounds scattered everywhere?
Well, essentially, the mayor's criteria are quite high criteria, because in the mayor's own SPD, the mayor talks about the provision of high quality children's play space. And similarly to our own policy in our local plan, I don't think anyone is really envisaging a high quality play space as being on the 10th floor of a building. Mm-hmm. I mean, clearly that there are buildings in many countries and also in London that do have high level play spaces, but that's normally because in that sort of location that's the only solution. Mm-hmm. But I mean, an interesting way to look at it is that our policy in the local plan relating to play space is also in the same part of the plan that deals with open spaces and gardens, and I think that the message is very clear that a high quality play space is not a hard space on top of a building, but should actually be sort of ground level space, and also something much more amenable to play than a hard space at that height.
I know we are more or less we more or less have a frame of work in responding or in actually in writing to him this time, and it's really kind of, I mean, the playground is not a part of it. Is there any way we can incorporate it, or it's not something that can be done now at this stage?
I know. I mean, the playground is definitely part of it. The addendum report that you have before you should be taken as part of the report. Mm-hmm. So if you're approving the main reports and you're approving the addendum report, then the two together form the council's report for these purposes. Okay. So everything that's in the addendum report is very much part of the case, and as Michael Burke was recommending, the addendum report clearly would be fleshed out and included within the council's letter, which would be the representation letter. I think when the mayor considers it, they will obviously have put great weight, or hopefully put great weight, on the representation letter. That they would also have before them the committee report and the addendum report. I'd suspect the mayor's office have those reports already.
Okay, thank you. My second question is about fire and safety and fire safety. What is the mayor's position on that? Does he have a criteria, or is it something that doesn't? It's just kind of understood as opposed to a specific item by itself?
Well, in terms of fire safety, the mayor's basically got to address the mayor's own policy, which is policy D12 of the London Plan. So that didn't exist at the time the mayor considered it originally, but it's now part of the intended to publish London Plan. Okay. D12 it's a slightly curious planning policy in the sense that it does rather overlap with the building regulations. Yeah. As you'll be aware, the primary sort of framework for dealing with fire safety requirements are the building regulations, and that they've obviously been beefed up significantly since the Grenfell fire, and may yet be further expanded, of course. Policy D12 does overlap with that, but it also, by definition, as being part of the development plan, it then brings fire safety into the sphere of town planning as well.
Okay.
And how it would apply here is that the mayor needs to require a fire statement which basically explains everything to do with the physical structure of the building and its resilience in terms of fire. It needs to explain the layout of the building and sort of how people would be safe within it, and means of escape, so how people would escape from it. And the fire statement brings all of those things together in one document. But one hasn't been prepared here yet, but part of the council's position should be clearly that a fire statement should be prepared and needs to be scrutinised very carefully by the mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Martin.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Bakhtiar.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Wala asked my first question. I'm not going to repeat that. Thanks, Wala. And the other question or question I have is for Mr. Taylor. Is would you share your letter with the chairman before sending, or it's down to you once we've approved your recommendation?
That's entirely up to the chairman. I mean, I suspect the chairman might well want to see the letter before it's sent out. But I'll leave that for the chairman to explain at the end.
Well, I really would like to make sure that the inputs we had, objector supporters had this evening, would be included in the letter if possible. And we need the chairman to do that to make sure everyone is happy. Thank you.
No, I think Mo, that's an entirely fair point, and I think it would be my intention to review first thing tomorrow morning what representation we were going to make as a committee, just to check that it was what I thought that we had agreed at the meeting. So no, that's understood. I think that's a good point. Tom, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was just going to pick up the point made by Councillor Hammond on the provision of hotel rooms in the borough and the changes over the last year, and whether it would be worth including, in addition to the 175 new rooms in Notting Hill, the Harrington Hall, which Councillor Hammond mentioned. And there may be others. I don't know if officers have investigated whether there are others in the area, but certainly Harrington Hall, it seems like it might be
actually, Tom, sorry if I can just cut in there.
Yes,
there was also fairly recently, we granted permission for a hotel development in Pavilion Road in Knightsbridge. Now, as I understand it from memory, I think that was a 120-bed hotel in Knightsbridge. So within the last year, I think the committee has granted 2 permissions, which are almost 300 rooms. And as Councillor Hammond mentioned, a hotel which I don't know it myself, but I think I understood it had been closed, and now that is in fact being brought back into use. And I think he mentioned of the order of 200 rooms. So in terms of borough provision of hotel accommodation, I think that is really quite significant. And I think, Mr. Taylor, I feel that's actually quite a strong report, because the intent to publish London Plan makes reference to hotel accommodation in RBKC and of course across London. And I think that's clearly a much more modern policy to be given considerable weight than our old CF8 policy, which is from a number of years ago, because it's from our local plan. I don't know, Mr. Taylor, can you just add anything to that?
Well, I mean, in terms of the hotel rooms that have been approved recently, But when Councillor Hammond was speaking, I'd already noted down the Harrington Hall when he was speaking, and when he was speaking just then, I've just added Pavilion Road to it. So we'll certainly include those. In fact, what I will do is over the next few days, obviously we'll be working out what information or evidence we can put into the representation letter. So we'll make sure that we capture any other hotel rooms that we might have approved recently that we haven't thought of this evening, but certainly Pavilion Road and Harrington Hall will be in there. In terms of hotel policy, well, essentially the Mayor's new policy, obviously it's an intended to publish policy, but at that stage it does need to be given quite significant weight. It's more than just a material consideration. It now should be given significant weight. And I think what we can demonstrate here is that in Kensington and Chelsea, we are already meeting the targets of that policy. That the proposed development here is simply not necessary to satisfy the Mayor's projections for London. And neither is it necessary to satisfy any local policy.
That's no. I think that's an important point, and I think it definitely should form part of our representation. Charles, Councillor O'Connor, sorry you had to wait a bit. Charles, go ahead.
That's all right. Thank you very much. It's just a quick procedural question, really, for Derek Taylor. And sorry if I've missed it, but the public hearing on the 22nd of October. Do we turn up and speak at that?
Well, essentially, as one of the key consultees, it's up to the council to decide. That the council can request to speak at the hearing, or the council could simply send in a written representation.
And what is currently are you minded to do, or are we minded to do?
I don't think we've actually concluded on that. Simply, I think that's probably the conversation that we'll have immediately after this committee meeting.
Is it something we as a committee can recommend that either Mr. Lomas or you or someone goes along and makes the case?
Certainly, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think just quickly by way of comment, I think it would be absolutely certain that on a matter of this sort of importance, senior officers would be present. Exactly whether we would wish to have officers speak or merely make a written representation, I think that's something to be decided, obviously in the light of our decision this evening. So that's that follows on from this evening's discussion. If I would just like to a couple of quick points which were raised by speakers. First of all, because I can remember when the application was originally considered, I mean the thought of having a 1,500 seat kind of conference venue, and the traffic impact of that, I mean, it was something which I did feel was a significant point. I'd just like to ask Mr. Taylor, I mean, is that something, does that fit in to what we've already outlined in by way of recommendation, or is it something that we could sensibly add, or what's the feeling about that?
Well, Chairman, that's when it was mentioned a while ago this evening, that's something that I started to think about. I would introduce a note of caution, I think, on that for the following reasons.
Yes.
That at the moment, I mean, the council's reason for refusal is obviously one that can be substantiated. I mean, there are very good arguments and evidence to support it. To introduce a new reason for refusal now, I would certainly caution because to do so without actually having new evidence to support it, I think would be risky. It'd be risky if it was then to be presented to the mayor's hearing. It would be even riskier if ultimately we ended up at a public inquiry and the council wanted to clearly play a major part in that as an interested party. And what wouldn't be a good idea at that time would be a reason for refusal containing something that wasn't properly backed up by evidence.
Okay.
And the danger here is that the highways team who assessed the application originally haven't objected in terms of the conference facility. I suspect they didn't object because they were confident that could be sufficiently controlled through traffic management plans and other conditions. I mean, I'd need to speak to them to be certain, but that would be my guess.
I'm not sure if it's appropriate that I add a little flavor to that, but I work in that industry, that it's not something that 1,500 people come in for an hour or two. They're there for days at a time.
Mr. Christensen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. In this part of the meeting, unfortunately, you're not able to question officers.
It's more of a.
We're pursuing the point.
It wasn't a question. It was clarity.
We're taking it seriously, but I'm sorry. You can't have a conversation with Mr. Taylor. But so if I can just, Derek Taylor, if I can just say, we're saying that in order to present the strongest possible case, we probably have to take things which in a lot of people would feel were perhaps very obvious points. It clearly would be extraordinarily difficult, the amount of traffic that was generated. But if there isn't quite the evidence base there, then we've got to be careful about sort of adding things that we can't be very certain that we can justify. That's basically have I understood that right, Mr. Taylor? That's the point you're making?
Yes, I think essentially it is, Chairman. That the mayor would be the first person to point out, well, that wasn't in your recommended reasons for refusal last time, but what has changed since then to now bring it into the reasons for refusal. And then obviously if we did end up at a public inquiry, you can be sure that would be asked at the inquiry too.
I think that's right. And I suspect, I'd just like your opinion on this, that I suspect the point about South Kensington Tube, now obviously, that there is a planning application coming forward for that. In slightly similar fashion, I think it's a perfectly sensible thing for someone living locally to put forward, but in terms of our kind of quite narrow remit, I'm not convinced that that's something that really we can add. What do you feel about that?
Well, obviously the course for this site or for South Kensington, neither course is yet really known for the medium to long term. If both sites were under construction, if they're both permitted and were under construction at the same time, then there would be extremely detailed construction traffic management plans that would have to relate to both. And one of the criteria would no doubt be that construction traffic for one site would need to take account of the construction traffic management plan for the other site. There would be, I think, a lot of work to do at the time, because obviously they would both be significant building projects. And it's very difficult at this point to envisage how one would relate to the other.
Yeah. No, I can see that point.
If I may add, Chairman.
Yes, Amanda Reid, Director. Yeah.
In respect of the point raised by Craig, forgive me, I don't have your surname listed in front of me. The cumulative.
Craig Crawford. Yeah.
Thank you. The cumulative impact of the development, given that the substantive proposal is the subject of environmental impact assessment, there will be, as part of that assessment, a cumulative impact assessment, and that cumulative impact assessment will take into account projects that are committed. So it's likely that the applicant will have, if they have not already, updated their cumulative impact assessment to make sure it's fit for purpose at this time, the time when the Mayor is considering the application. However, it's possible that the South Kensington Station proposals will not be included in that, not being committed at this time.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Colleagues, are there any final questions? Otherwise, I think we can probably move forward to making a decision on this. No? Good. Well, we've got in front of us the recommendation set out in the report, and also the additional points set out in the addendum report. Of those, I feel the point about hotels, I think is actually a very strong point, and I think that in addition to point 4 of the recommendation, which gives the Mayor information about housing schemes which have been granted or approved by or supported by us in the last year and a bit, which is a very significant number of new homes, including affordable homes. I think that is very significant. I think the points about employment and children's play space, I think they're worth making, although I think in the greater planning balance they're perhaps of less importance. But I feel that the recommendation plus the suggestions in the addendum report are very good. Is there anyone, or indeed perhaps Mr. Fletcher, the legal department, is there anything that you feel that we need to note or have to be reminded of before we actually take a vote on approving the recommendation? No? Okay. Well,
no.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Sorry, just Ross Fletcher here. I just said no, there's nothing additional.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, the line wasn't good there. I didn't quite catch that. No, thank you for that. Okay, well, in that case, colleagues, the recommendation is set out in the report and also in the addendum report, as Mr. Taylor has set out, and I have just run through. If I can go down the committee and ask if you are in favour of the recommendation or not. So I'll start with Councillor Bakhtiar.
In favour, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
In favour, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Idris.
In favour, Chairman.
Councillor O'Connor.
And I'm in favour.
And I'm in favour as well. So that the recommendation as set out in the report and the further addendum report is approved. And if I could ask Mr. Taylor, if you could circulate as soon as possible the final wording, if you can email that to me, and obviously I will then look at that immediately, and we will forward that onto the GLA, the Mayor of London, as soon as possible. So that's very good. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. That concludes our meeting this evening. Thank you for everyone who registered to speak and who spoke. And thank you finally to the number of government services officers whose role is very important in making these virtual meetings happen on time and happen correctly. So thank you very much, and good evening. Thank you.